Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding, here to discuss a little bit about visa holders in the United States and how the taxes work. So, when someone is a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, right, they are subject to U.S. tax on their worldwide income. Permanent residents may be able to make a treaty election to be treated as a non-resident alien, depending on country of residence, and if they qualify. For the most part, U.S. citizens will always be taxed on their worldwide income. That also includes reporting foreign accounts, assets, investments, entities, etc., etc. But there's also another third category of individual who can get taxed on their worldwide income. Usually it will be a visa holder. It doesn't have to be, but typically it'll be a visa holder who meets the substantial presence test. The substantial presence test is essentially a counting days test. So you look at how many days the taxpayer was in the current year. It has to be at least 31. How many in the prior year? 3-to-1 ratio. How many 2 years back? 6-to-1 ratio. You add it all up. And then if they meet the threshold, then they are considered for that year to be taxed on their worldwide income. The test is done every year, and that makes it a little different than the other categories. So, for example, even if you were in the United States for 300 days in each of the past 2 years, if you're only in the U.S. on a visa, let's say for 25 days in the current year, you wouldn't qualify because you have to be in the U.S. for at least 31 days. But another issue that is confusing, and the IRS doesn't help to lessen the confusion, is that all different types of visas can be subject to substantial presence. One would think that you would have to be employed, right? Like an L1, H1B, but that's actually not the case. So let's kind of go through some common examples, right? Someone's here on H1B. So let's say they were in the United States on an F1 visa, they graduated school, and then they got their H1B visa. If they got their H1B visa in the current year, and they were in the U.S. in the current year for, let's say, 7 months, then they're going to qualify as having to report their worldwide income, and they're going to have to do global reporting as well of their foreign accounts, assets, and investments. Same with the transfer, right? So let's say someone was working overseas, and then they get transferred to the United States. First time they're in the United States, and it's February, and they stay the whole year. Well, then they're going to be subject to U.S. tax on their worldwide income in that year. But let's say instead they get transferred in October, it's the first year, then they wouldn't. Why? Because using that test, they haven't been in the United States for a total of 183 days, and so they would only get taxed on their U.S. sourced income, not their worldwide income. And in some situations, it may not make any bit of a difference, especially if the majority of their income is in the United States, but just something to think about in terms of why the substantial presence test is so important. Now, beyond employment and work transfer, other types of investments too. So let's say someone wanted to get the EB-5 investment visa. They come to the United States. They could be taxed on their worldwide income if they meet substantial presence. E2 treaty, E3 Australia treaties. They can also be subject to worldwide income. A common one that people don't really think about because they're not working or investing or anything is your B1, B2 tourist visa. That visa can be used for business purposes as well, but primarily tourist visas. So let's say with the B1, B2 tourist visa, 6 months in, 6 months out of the U.S., right? And let's say you do that consecutively. Well, you're going to be in the United States for presumably more than 183 days when you start doing that test. And so maybe not the first year, but thereafter, you're going to be subject to substantial presence tax on your worldwide income. So let's go through a few issues to consider in case you get stuck in this matrix and what you could do to try to avoid it or limit it. First, you have to be in the U.S. for at least 31 days in the current year, like I mentioned earlier. So maybe you met substantial presence in the 2 prior years. You have a huge financial windfall coming in. You decide you're only going to come to the United States for 2 weeks in the present year, 3 weeks. Then technically you won't meet substantial presence because you won't meet the 31-day rule. Now, even if you do meet substantial presence, there's something called the closer connection exception. So if you can show that you have a closer connection to a foreign country or multiple countries, then you may be able to avoid substantial presence, worldwide income. So you meet the substantial presence test, but then you meet the exception. So as a result, you don't have to pay tax on your worldwide income. And then there's some other exceptions too. Students, certain people who come here for research, professor type jobs for the first 2 years, depending on the treaty, they may also qualify for an exception. For taxpayers who plan on staying in the United States for a while, but are concerned in the future that they may be subject to an exit tax, something to think about is when you're on the visa, it's not the same as being a permanent resident. And so those years that you're on the visa don't count toward the 8 to 15 years for long-term residence. So that's something else to consider, whether you actually want to become a permanent resident or not. If you're out of compliance and you want to get into compliance, there's various programs you can consider. If you're willful, there's VDP. If you're non-willful, there's lots of programs you can consider. The streamlined procedures, delinquency procedures, and reasonable cause. We got a ton of free information available on our main website and our sub-websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if it's appropriate to your matter and it's something that we handle here. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.